Burgess here with Music Marketing TV, and today we're going to be talking about Harmor and some basic things you can do, especially if you're brand new and you're just looking for interesting things that can really go a long way towards making your sound more interesting, cool, more musical. Then we're going to be talking about some things you can do here in this video. So let's jump right into it. All right, so let me show you an example real quick. I've got sort of this chill out track going on, and I've got two pretty basic things that I can give you that will immediately, if you've got the notes down, this can really go a long ways towards just making your bass seem a whole lot more interesting. Yeah, so a pretty cool thing right there, very super chilled, and the bass line is a big part of it. Really creates just a really nice vibe. I might go in later and actually add in a separate sub to go with it. But basically, this is a Harmor, and when you do sound design, so let's just say you're new, you're looking to make some cool sounds, you know, maybe a little bit. So you've got in here, my first and number one tip for you is to get the notes down. If you have what you need is you need a melodic idea. And so in mine was do, 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 do. That was it. That was the idea. And it's a pretty solid idea. I use it 3 times and then I vary it right on the 4th time. And this is a pretty solid formula if you're really struggling to get something. Come up with just a cool rhythm, add some notes until you come up with some, what we would call a motif. It's basically like a little musical idea. And once you've got one of those, repeat it in an interesting way 3 times, and on the 4th time, do something a bit different. If you can do that, it'll be catchy most of the time. This is like tried and true. Once you know about this, you'll hear it in music all over the place, and you'll begin to realize there's something about the number 3 and then doing something different on the 4th time, and these little packets of ideas. They go a tremendous way. So first off, you're going to need something like that. So once you're there, a lot of times I see people find a preset or a patch and just sort of leave it at that and move on. And sometimes that can really work out great. I use that method all the time. But other times I want to add character to my melody. Just having it, every single note sounding the exact same way every single time is a little off-putting. It's very robotic, and it certainly doesn't follow the same kind of idea we used here where we had 3 of a similar and then something a bit different at the end. That variation, humans really like that variation, and they want it to be musical and to match what the music's doing. So my recommendation to you is to grab some parameters that you think are interesting and to automate them. Now, if you don't know what automation is essentially where you give the program instructions. So here I've got some automation here. And what this is saying is, for example, this is for the first filter inside of Harmor. So I'm automating this guy. And to do that, you simply right click on it and go to create automation clip. And it will create one of these clips for you. And essentially, when the playhead goes over it, it's going to move that knob for you. So in fact, if I just solo this, you can see the knob moving. So what you could do is you can grab things that affect your sound, right? So if we like play this, you know, that could be something interesting to vary over time. And inside, most synthesizers have internal things like envelopes, LFOs, and these things can turn these knobs for you in the synthesis engine. But the thing is, they're the same every time. And that's just inherently a little less musical often, especially when you're dealing with the melody. You know, there's a lot of things. Sometimes you want something that sounds very similar every time. Maybe it's like a melody that goes for a bell sound, or it's just a really, really big lead. But I really wanted something that was quite a bit more expressive, and the notes themselves were only part of the performance, right? I need a performer. And so here, this is kind of like the performer adding a flair. You know, you hand a clarinet to someone and they start playing, they're going to add dynamics, they're going to get louder and softer. They're going to add vibrato, meaning they're going to change the pitch in certain spots in a musical way. And this is kind of like a performance. We're telling the synthesizer, hey, if you were a person, I'd like you to perform like this. So first off, I've written my notes and I had my bass sound, and I'm trying to go an extra, 10, 20%, get that extra musicality out of my my musical idea. So I took my filter and I automated it by just right clicking, going to create automation clip, and it's moving up and down with the notes, right? So the first note is a longer note. So I think it'd be cool if the filter opened up and then closed back down so that this next new note was soft. And this whole bit is sort of underneath the sound. And then I do another flare right here. And if we just listen to this. Now let's go ahead and let's mute this. So you could still, I have some other things that are, okay, so there's like layers here. I only took off one layer, but there's layers that are also in the background that we'll get to. But you can hear it did not open up nearly as much here. If we add this back in, you see that we get that nice little yow. That's nice. And I do that throughout. And the way you got to create your automation is once you have your notes down, just listen to where you think the phrases should open up, which notes should stand out, what would sound cool to you. And you want to be careful because sometimes it can be a distraction, right? To have, maybe you have flares in spots that other parts are happening. Like maybe the kick drum's doing a thing. You don't want to get in the way of the kick drum. So it's kind of a balancing act here. And that's why I sort of emphasize having a really strong, catchy phrase. It's usually much easier to tell what you want to do musically if you have a really strong phrase. And then, so the filter is my first one. It's probably the thing I automate the most. Like you're going to see this as probably the number one thing that is being controlled either internally or via automation of all of sound design. It's like the thing to automate. Because it's going to dictate so much. It dictates what later distortions are going to see and distort, right? Because if the filter took it out, it's never going to hit the distortion, and the distortion is going to sound totally different. So that's my first thing right there. My second thing is we have in the post-processing, so you could come in here and sort of look at all of this stuff and decide which things would be interesting to automate. My top one, though, is the filter, and I typically will add unison and some chorus, some distortion, and, mess with these combination of elements with the bass. If you don't already have these going, it can be really, really interesting because as soon as you add in unison, your bass is going to be in stereo if it wasn't already, and that can just be a really interesting thing to explore. But that's basically my first hot tip. My second hot tip is, okay, you've got this thing, you've got some automation. You should consider what's going to go on after the synthesizer. So in this particular case, I actually have a whole separate video for this, so I'm not going to cover it here. But I hit a bit crushing algorithm, but you don't have to hit this, right? You could hit any number of other things, but consider things like distortions, things that mess with the, well, in this case, this messes with the sample rate. This is a sample reducing / bit crushing plugin. I've got a chorus afterwards. At this point, you open up your library, you have all these awesome plugins, open them up and say, hey, what would be some cool ideas to follow this up with? And then the whole time you're doing it, you don't want to destroy your musical phrase. It should all be to serve the phrase. So the process, because I get a lot of questions in private lessons as well on how you come up with like phrases, or not phrases, but things to embellish the phrase without getting in the way and just losing the phrase. The answer is I start off with a basic thing like, a filter movement. And then I go and I grab things to try and enhance that movement in a way I think sounds cool. So in this case, I grabbed that sample reducer and I automated that, and it matches. If you notice, it mirrors when this goes down. That's a big change, and so it mirrors the filter. It's matching the filter here. So when one does something, the other one does something. So there's that. And there's one other thing I want to point out that I find usually really, really good to automate is in Harmor, you have basically, it's kind of like a wavetable. So you've got this right here. This is up here. This is a mix between your saw wave and your square wave. And a lot of times your square wave is going to sound radically different than your sawtooth wave. It just is. And so along with the filter, this is another one that I'm moving all the time. And in fact, if you get really into it, there's actually other synths that this is like the main point. And those are wavetable synthesizers, right? You need to move between one waveform to another. So I find that, especially since most of the time when I'm working in Harmor, I typically am, if I'm not using any of the resynthesis capabilities, I am sticking around with the saw waves and the square waves. And just moving between the two can create such an enormous variation. So let me go ahead and mute the automation for this. And we're just going to leave it on straight square first, just so you can hear what it sounds like. So that's straight square. Here is all saw wave. Oh, it's not gonna let me move it. Let me see if I can move it while it's playing. So the saw wave, this is just true in general because it has a whole bunch more harmonics. The saw wave is generally going to sound quite a bit more full, but it's not as wobbly, or I don't know how to describe it, like subby, because if we move back over to the square wave, you get that nice like whoop whoop whoop, but with saw waves you don't. You get like a more of a nasally kind of a thing. And that has to do with the different harmonic structures. And a lot of times the harmonic structures, especially when they're really regular, like the saw wave and the square wave, that's going to have a more noticeable impact because the pattern is easier to pick up on. And humans love patterns that are easy to pick up on. So what I do is I love to automate this. This is another one that where the filter is, I feel like this is also just another massive one that if you're new and you're kind of looking for things to mess with, filter and the timbre mix knob are going to be your two big starting points. So see, I'm transitioning to a mix between a square and a saw here to create that interesting variation. And then I'm more saw wave. So when I'm low, I'm a saw wave. When I'm high, I'm a square wave. That sounds really weird to say. But yeah, so that's what this one down here is. This is controlling the sample rate, and this is the filter. And just those three things put together take a sound that's a pretty standard, most people would leave it alone sound, and really take it to a new level of expression. Now, I settled on a bit crusher for just the vibe I was going for, but you might do something entirely different. It totally depends on the mood you're trying to feel. But with those things being said, I'm going to go ahead and play through it just to loop a couple more, just one more time, and let you hear it and just sort of see if you can, now you can hear all the additional things that have been put into what was originally a very static patch. And that's that. If you have any questions about this, let me know. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.